Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a file that really takes the tension out of those closed-door negotiating rooms and puts it right onto the street. We're talking about the lives of expatriates, travelers, and maybe most surprisingly, into movie theaters.
Yeah, that's it. Our mission today is to take a collection of official security alerts and some market reports and really analyze the immediate tangible effects of the current geopolitical strain between Japan and China.
That's right. So we've got documents from the Japanese government, really detailed advisories from its embassy in Beijing, and we're going to couple those with observations about this corresponding deterioration of public opinion inside China.
Exactly. We're tracking a fascinating, a pretty concerning feedback loop. It goes far beyond what you'd call traditional diplomacy.
The core insight here, and this is what we're going to spend our time unpacking, is how you can actually quantify the consequences of these recent diplomatic events. The sources, they're intentionally a bit vague on the specifics, but the result is that Chinese media and public opinion, what the reports call RU or public sentiment, has sharply worsened.
And they use a really strong word for it. It means a distinct, a very clear worsening. And this isn't just background noise. This worsening public mood is being cited by the Japanese government as a direct security risk.
Which is just incredible when you think about it.
It is. We're going to look at the specific actionable security protocols that Japan is now telling its citizens to follow. And this is advice that, well, it demands some deep behavioral modification.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me. We're also going to dive into the cultural fallout. I mean, we are talking about globally popular, completely non-political Japanese media, animated films specifically, being pulled from Chinese release schedules. It just shows how pervasive this tension really is. This is a deep dive into how a diplomatic chill becomes, well, a societal freeze.
A societal freeze, that's a great way to put it.
Okay, so let's unpack this central mechanism. The sources all confirm that the current situation is rooted in, and I'm quoting here, recent diplomatic events. These have significantly influenced relations and resulted in this sustained tension. We don't know the exact trigger, but the effect. That's measurable and it's really public.
That's the key thing. The sources establish a very clear causal link for us. You have diplomatic friction, which leads to tension, and that tension then leads directly to a rapid, measurable shift in the public mood. We're so used to focusing on, formal state-to-state communication, press releases, official meetings.
Right, the official channels.
Exactly. But here, the public sphere, the mood on the street, is explicitly being cited by a foreign power as a material factor in assessing the safety of its own people.
And the data point that really validates this whole discussion is that finding on the deterioration of Chinese media and public opinion. After these incidents, the reports state clearly that the Chinese media opinion, that sensitive metric of public sentiment, the EU concerning Japan, has demonstrably worsened.
Yeah. And this is where the conversation turns from, abstract analysis into very concrete risk management. What's truly fascinating is how the Japanese government responded to this specific shift in Chinese sentiment. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Kihara Minoru, he did not mince words. He cited this deterioration as the direct reason for issuing the latest, most urgent safety warning.
Just pause on that for a second. Think about the political weight of that statement. You have an official cabinet secretary of a major world power publicly stating that their security guidance for their own citizens in a neighboring country is being issued because of a negative shift in that country's media and public mood.
Yeah.
That feels like a real game changer for how security threats are assessed.
It's a profound moment of official acknowledgement. It validates that the Japanese government views the domestic emotional state in China as reported, amplified, and, well, perhaps even directed by its media as a material factor, a factor in assessing the personal safety risk for its citizens.
Yeah.
And Kihara Minoru stressed that this was a repeat call to elevate prevention measures. The term used was echu. So this wasn't some new warning born from a sudden crisis. It was a re-emphasis. That indicates the environment had already crossed a dangerous pre-existing threshold.
That concept of a re-emphasis is so key. It's not a panic button. It signals a much more sophisticated assessment. They weren't just putting out a generic be careful warning. They were confirming that the current tension had pushed the risk level past what was already considered high.
Precisely. If we put on our diplomatic hats for a second, when a cabinet secretary says something is a re-emphasis, they're communicating on multiple levels. They're telling their own population, we've been watching this, we're on top of it. but they're also sending a message to the host nation.
That message being?
That they've been watching this tension build for a while. The latest diplomatic event, whatever it was, simply provided the justification for a public escalation of their security posture. They're signaling that the underlying risk, this sort of nationalistic hostility, was already there, but the recent media coverage elevated it into the actionable threat category.
But this raises a really important critical question, doesn't it? When an official government communication acknowledges foreign media sentiment as a direct security risk factor, what does that tell us about their perception of control and stability within that neighboring nation?
That's a fantastic question.
Is Japan sort of, I don't know, admitting that the risk comes from non-state actors who are just whipped up by the media? Or is it more of a veiled criticism of how that media is managed?
It suggests they believe the environment is potentially less stable, or at least less predictable, than standard diplomatic channels might imply. They're anticipating risk from non-state actors, individuals or groups, whose actions are fueled by that intense, often nationalistic sentiment you see in the media.
Okay.
And in an environment where state media play such a central role in shaping public dialogue, acknowledging the sentiment is, well, it's essentially acknowledging a form of state-sanctioned risk.
So the feedback loop is the critical piece here. Diplomatic action leads to an intense media reaction and amplification, which then fuels that volatile public sentiment. And then that sentiment becomes a genuine, recognized security threat that actually impacts policy and commerce.
Yes. It converts public sentiment, the yotoli, into a policy-relevant metric for personal safety. And this isn't just political commentary. This is the foundational analysis upon which Japan built its next set of highly detailed, very prescriptive security directives for its citizens on the ground. And those directives, that's what we need to analyze next, because they show the true gravity of the situation.
Okay, so we've established the why, this escalating tension driven by worsening public sentiment. Now let's get into the what. The response was multi-layered, highly detailed, and really it seems like it was designed to minimize contact. It just demonstrates a heightened level of operational concern.
Yes, the message was delivered with real force. It involved 3 layers to reinforce its gravity. First, you have the Japanese government making that general call for strengthened measures. Then, as we said, Chief Cabinet Secretary Kihara Minoru confirming it was a necessary re-emphasis of caution that was already in place.
And then the third entity, the one that provided the truly actionable details, the Japanese embassy in China. They're the ones who issued these detailed, specific behavioral guidelines that move way beyond a general sense of be careful and actually instruct citizens on how to actively manage their risk profile in daily life.
Let's start with that top-level mandate. The primary governmental call was to strengthen prevention measures, that was coupled with some very clear location avoidance advice. Citizens are strongly advised to avoid going to crowded places or mitigate risk.
Avoiding crowded places, I mean, that sounds like standard travel advice, but here the implication is so deeply specific, isn't it? Given the context of the public sentiment, the risk isn't about, stampedes or pickpockets.
Not at all.
It's about avoiding places where that nationalist sentiment could coalesce really rapidly into something aggressive, and perhaps directed specifically at anyone perceived as Japanese.
That is the essential distinction. This is not about common crime. It's about avoiding situations where an individual's Japanese identity might be conspicuously exposed to a volatile crowd. It shifts the risk dramatically from, random acts to ideologically or politically fueled confrontation.
But the embassy's specific behavior protocols, the really detailed do's and don'ts, that's where the reality of the situation just hits home. They shift the burden of security entirely onto the individual, demanding this active self-management of your own identity and movement.
Let's break down these 6 core protocols. They really paint a picture of a government that perceives a widespread, decentralized threat against its nationals.
The first one is, it's just profoundly challenging for anyone living abroad, especially if you're there for business or education. Citizens must interact cautiously with Chinese citizens. The original is PDUNRG.
Interacting cautiously. What does that mean? It implies a permanent state of guarded behavior. It means you're maintaining distance, you're avoiding sensitive discussions, you're minimizing any potential for misunderstanding or, worse, confrontation.
It's a tacit acknowledgement that a totally normal, everyday, casual conversation now carries an elevated risk of being misinterpreted or escalated because of these underlying tensions.
Exactly. For a business person, a teacher, a student, This instruction can make basic, necessary professional dealings virtually impossible.
That's the friction point, isn't it? How can you truly conduct a normal life, run a business, go shopping, meet your neighbors, if you are constantly filtering your speech and your demeanor to avoid giving offense? It essentially mandates a degree of emotional and communicative isolation.
It absolutely mandates a defensive posture. And the second point just reinforces this need for kind of invisibility. Be sure to comply with local customs.
Which, again, on the surface sounds like just good advice for any traveler anywhere.
Of course. But in a high-tension situation like this, any perceived deviation takes on a massive significance. Any slight against local customs could be magnified and interpreted as calculated disrespect or provocation, especially by a hostile nationalist online community that's looking for a reason to be outraged.
So compliance becomes a visible form of submission, almost. It's a protective camouflage against attracting negative attention. Then the instructions move to physical awareness. Citizens are told to always pay attention to surroundings when outside.
This is foundational security advice, yes. But here it mandates hypervigilance. They aren't just looking for suspicious figures in a general sense. They're looking for groups exhibiting strong, organized nationalist fervor, or individuals who might be trying to profile them or follow them.
And the next instruction is maybe the most indicative of a serious personal risk. Avoid moving alone.
That's a textbook response to a perceived rise in targeted attacks or harassment. Single individuals are just easier targets for verbal abuse, for intimidation, or physical harm without immediate witnesses or backup.
But let's bring that friction point back again. What about the millions of expats who have to commute alone, or whose jobs require them to move around independently? This isn't always practical.
That's the operational reality the embassy advice sort of ignores. While the advice is sound from a pure security perspective, moving in pairs provides mutual security and immediate witnesses, it imposes immense practical burdens. It signals that the government can't guarantee the safety of its citizens if they operate in isolation. It forces them to fundamentally reorganize their lives, which, may not be feasible for those without established expatriate networks.
And for families, the warning becomes even more explicit and emotionally charged. Exercise special caution when taking children out.
This is a clear indicator that the perceived risk is indiscriminate and serious. When warnings start to include children, it signals that the threat is pervasive and affects the entire expatriate community structure. Children, they naturally draw attention, and involving them in public outings just adds layers of vulnerability that the embassy clearly feels must be proactively mitigated.
When a government has to address the potential risk to children, it speaks volumes about the gravity of their deepest fears about potential hostility.
It really does. Finally, there's the instruction for immediate tactical action. If any suspicious persons or groups are encountered, citizens should immediately move away to ensure safety.
So de-escalate by leaving.
Not just de-escalate, it's a strict non-engagement policy. The instruction is not to film, not to argue, not to assert your rights, but to physically retreat immediately. It prioritizes rapid disengagement over every other consideration. It reinforces the message that any confrontation in this heightened emotional climate is exponentially more dangerous than usual. They're asking citizens to become invisible, cautious, and prepared to flee at the first sign of trouble.
So if we analyze the depth of all these warnings together, we see they move far, far beyond typical travel advisories. They move into specific tactical behavioral modifications. This is personalized security advice driven by geopolitical stress, forcing citizens to integrate these complex security protocols into their daily lives just to operate safely.
It illustrates perfectly that the risk has been successfully transferred down to the individual citizen level. The link between high-level diplomatic expats and the need for a parent to be extra careful taking their child to a park has never been clearer. It confirms the volatility of that nay is being taken as a literal physical threat.
The complexity of this situation just deepens when we look at how the tension has spilled out of security protocols and into the realm of popular culture and commerce. This, for me, is perhaps the most vivid illustration of the emotional nature of the conflict.
It's a remarkable cycle, really. You have the diplomatic events, they lead to public anger, which necessitates government security warnings. But that same worsened domestic audience sentiment, the Wu Yu, has also translated directly into concrete commercial decisions by Chinese film distributors.
And the distributors were publicly transparent about their justification, which is fascinating in itself. Chinese state media, CCTV, reported that the suspension of the films was a prudent decision. The term was "yuing," and it was based explicitly on the current domestic public mood.
This phrase, "yu prudent decision," is so crucial. We need to spend a little time analyzing its significance. It's a commercial decision, but it's cloaked in the language of national sensitivity. The distributors are basically acknowledging that releasing Japanese cultural content, even if it's totally non-political, poses too high a risk.
A risk of what, exactly? Backlash.
Backlash of nationalist backlash, yeah. Protests, online harassment campaigns, things that could spill into physical disruption at cinemas. They're trying to get ahead of that.
This represents the ultimate form of self-censorship, then, and it's driven by perceived geopolitical volatility. I mean, when distributors are willing to absorb the significant immediate commercial loss of pulling a major, already marketed film at the last minute, they are calculating that the cost of that loss is less than the cost of public disruption and potential official displeasure from releasing a Japanese film during this sensitive period.
It's a profound shift in how you calculate market risk. Normally, prudence relates to box office projections or marketing costs. Here, prudence means avoiding geopolitical friction. This creates a dangerous precedent. The business viability of cultural exchange is now directly tied to the highly volatile, media-shaped bois.
And we're not talking about some obscure art house film or a political documentary. We're talking about major, universally popular Japanese media. This is where the aha moment of this deep dive really lands.
The specific films that were affected really highlight just how pervasive this tension is. The hostility has spread far beyond politically sensitive topics to target the country of origin itself, regardless of how neutral the content is.
Okay, let's start with the first example, the animated film. Crying Shinchan. Super gorgeous.
Yep.
Scorching Kazukabi Dancers. The original title is Gyuro Echine.
Right. Crying Shinchan is a globally recognized, family-friendly franchise. It's known for slapstick humor, a bit of an irreverent tone, and crucially, it's designed for children and families. Its target demographic is completely 100% apolitical. The suspension of this film demonstrates that the criterion for commercial viability is no longer content, but purely national origin during a sensitive time.
It's just stunning. Geopolitical tensions are literally preventing Chinese children from watching a cartoon about dancing. This highlights the depth of the sacrifice the distributors are making. They're willing to sacrifice children's entertainment and family box office receipts because the risk of offending the national mood is just too great.
And the suspension is even more dramatic when you consider the second title they pulled, the manga adaptation film, Cells at Work. Or
Cells at Work. I mean, this is a franchise based on anthropomorphizing the inner workings of the human body. You have red blood cells as characters, white blood cells, platelets. It's entertaining, sure, but it's often used in educational settings to teach basic biology and immunology. It is absolutely fundamentally apolitical.
For a distributor to deem an anime about immunology and physiology too risky to release, it indicates that simply carrying the label Japanese is enough to warrant commercial withdrawal. This is censorship not based on ideology or historical inaccuracy. It's censorship based solely on national origin, and it's driven by the perceived volatility of the domestic audience.
This confirms the maximum breadth of the tension. When you stop family entertainment and educational content, you are sacrificing cultural and commercial exchange entirely, based on the perceived fear of public reaction. This chilling effect on commerce and culture is almost as profound as the security warnings themselves.
And this fragility, it impacts more than just these two movie titles. It sends a severe chill through all other forms of Japanese cultural imports, music, literature, video games, co-productions, even tourism. It signals to Japanese companies in these sectors that their entire business model, which relies on Chinese consumer acceptance, is now directly leveraged against the political climate. It's subject to sudden withdrawal based on that fluctuating yen.
So we see the synthesis, the whole cycle. Diplomatic events trigger the entire process. This leads to a sharp public opinion shift, where sentiment, it worsens. And this then triggers a dual response, a government security response, escalating warnings with detailed behavioral instructions for citizens.
And a private cultural commercial response, where distributors pull major cultural exports under the pretense of prudence. That is human.
The sources really reveal that the tension isn't theoretical at all. It's an active force shaping commercial decisions and personal safety guidelines, all fueled by the public mood. This is a highly restrictive system where the audience itself holds this kind of disruptive veto power.
It's a veto power. That's a good way to describe it.
Let's go back for a moment to the severity that's implied by the security warnings, and let's link them back to this cultural fallout. If the public sentiment is volatile enough to shut down a movie release of Crayon Shin-chan, it logically validates the Japanese government's warning that this same sentiment poses a genuine, immediate risk to its citizens in crowded public places.
It creates a seamless link between the cultural and the security spheres. The cultural shutdown is, in a way, evidence that the domestic environment is too hot for Japanese people, whether they are animated characters on a screen or actual physical residents, to operate without immense risk.
And for Japanese residents in China, this isn't just a news story, it's a fundamental structural change in their living conditions. They have to assume every interaction, every public outing, every business deal could be judged through this new, highly nationalistic, media-driven lens.
Indeed. The requirement to interact cautiously and avoid crowds is not a temporary inconvenience. It's a structural barrier to a normal life, and it's imposed entirely by the external environment. It suggests a move away from the relaxed cultural intermingling that often characterizes major cities, and a move back toward a defensive posture rooted entirely in one's nationality.
And the suspension of these films highlights that there is little sanctuary, even in entertainment. If the market is too hot for educational content like Cells at Work, there is truly no safe ground for cultural neutrality or apolitical commerce. The tension, once confined to political figures, has been successfully democratized. It's affecting the consumer, the distributor, the diplomat, and the citizen on the street.
And that underscores the power of media narrative in shaping international risk. When the media defines the mood as "sast on both governments and corporations take immediate, costly action based on that assessment. It provides a highly instructive blueprint for understanding how geopolitical events metastasize into everyday life and commerce.
Let's spend just a little more time analyzing the diplomatic significance of the language that was used by Chief Cabinet Secretary Kihara Minoru. We established that this re-emphasis of caution signals an escalation past an already existing high-risk threshold.
It is a deliberate signal. It's a signal to Tokyo's political base that they're being attentive, but it's also, a bit of a challenge to Beijing. By explicitly citing the negative Chinese media sentiment as the reason for the security alert, Tokyo is subtly placing the blame for this heightened risk environment directly on Beijing's management of its own domestic narratives.
So it's not just a warning to their citizens, but it's also a diplomatic maneuver that says something like, "We are concerned that your internal communication environment is creating external security risks for our people."
Exactly. And that detailed nature of the embassy warnings, those 6 behavioral protocols, that reflects not paranoia, but a deep understanding of how non-governmental hostility often manifests itself. The advice is specifically designed to counter profiling and opportunistic harassment.
Let's contrast this with an alert related to, say, local elections or civil unrest. Those warnings tend to focus on avoiding specific areas or adhering to curfews. Here, the warnings are deeply personalized and continuous. Interact cautiously, avoid single movement. This confirms the threat is directed at their national identity, not simply at some general societal instability.
The underlying fear is one of identification. The moment a Japanese citizen is identified as such, whether it's through their language, their behavior, their physical appearance, they become the potential focus of that negative public sentiment. The embassy's guidance is essentially instructing citizens to practice deep integration into the background, to minimize any identifying markers of foreignness to avoid being marked as a soft target.
This is such a complex burden to place on any expatriate professional. It converts adherence to local rules from a matter of basic respect into a matter of personal security. This level of prescribed caution fundamentally alters the experience of living or working in the country. It converts the environment from a foreign home into a persistently high-risk zone solely because of the external political temperature.
And we circle right back to the symmetry of the cultural impact. The distributors pulling films based on the audience's mood perfectly mirrors the government issuing warnings based on the audience's mood. The audience, or at least the perception of the audience's anger, holds this tremendous disruptive power in this specific geopolitical dynamic. When the mood of the audience dictates both government policy on security and commercial policy on film releases, the political tension has fully saturated the societal level.
This level of detail in the sources, from Kihara Minoru's precise language to the names of the suspended cartoons, it gives us a complete, actionable picture of how quickly diplomatic disagreements can spiral down to impact the everyday lives of millions, both in terms of their safety and their cultural consumption.
This has been a critical analysis, I think. It's really illuminated the often hidden operational costs of geopolitical strain.
So, to synthesize the key takeaways for you, recent diplomatic events have triggered a sharp, officially recognized deterioration in Chinese public sentiment toward Japan. That's really. And in response, the Japanese government has significantly escalated its security warnings. It's moved the conversation into tactical personal security by advising citizens on conscious interaction, avoiding crowds, and avoiding moving alone. These protocols, they fundamentally alter the daily life of Japanese nationals in China. And at the same time, that very same adverse domestic sentiment, that volatile ukure, prompted Chinese distributors to pull major non-political Japanese cultural exports. We're talking even educational content and family cartoons under the public justification of a prudent decision, a show-on.
The major conclusion here is that diplomatic strain is no longer confined to official government channels. It immediately affects personal security and the flow of mainstream culture. It acts as a profound disruptive force in everyday life and commerce. The cycle is complete, it's tight, and it is highly restrictive.
The scope of this impact is just comprehensive. It involves state media reporting, high-level cabinet secretaries, detailed embassy security protocol developers, film distributors making these costly commercial sacrifices, and, most importantly, the individual Japanese citizen just trying to live their life under continuous hypervigilance.
And the connection between the diplomatic stage and the cultural stage is the audience. It's that domestic mood, the perceived anger, that acts as the lever for both the security response and the commercial response.
And that leads us to a final thought-provoking idea based entirely on the sources we've reviewed today. We've seen that the domestic public sentiment in China becomes the explicit, publicly stated criteria for both a foreign government's security alerts and domestic commercial decisions regarding cultural exchange.
So consider this. What does it mean for global stability when the mood of the audience, this often vague, volatile, and easily media-shaped entity, is elevated to a policy-making and commerce-dictating force in international relations? It suggests that in this new era, domestic emotional volatility is perhaps the most critical external security and commercial risk factor of all. It makes the managing of a domestic narrative as important as managing international treaties. It's something to ponder as you navigate the complexities of global interaction.
A truly powerful thought to leave you with. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.